I'm shocked. Genuinely. I can't believe it. Look, I do not care about any of the social political commentary that is surrounding Dragon Age the Veilguard right now, because all I think it does is distract from what we should be talking about. This is a customer first issue, and that is the most important thing. This is a publisher that knew that their game was divisive, that knew that this was a defining moment for a studio in recovery, and they made the wrong choice. You give review codes to all established reviewers or none. Simple as that. The minute that you start getting picky choosy with who you give those codes to, the minute that you start leaving room for doubt, is the minute that you have violated our trust, ruined the integrity of your game and of your brand. Not that there's really that much left for EA or BioWare anyway, but you do not deserve our money. You are not entitled to it. You have to earn it. And that's not what this is. The minute that you start going out and trying to shape and lead the conversation around a game in a certain direction is the minute that you have switched from earning our money to thieving. And that's exactly what this is. Today, what I want to do is I want to talk about access journalism, because that's exactly what this ends up being. I want to talk about why this actually happened, what happened, and more importantly, what this means in the future. This is something to pay attention to. Now, if you've been online, you've likely seen some discourse about how some creators and reviewers didn't receive review codes for Dragon Age the Veilguard. FXIV and Wolfart FPS were some of the first to step forward. These are established creators with long-standing careers. They wouldn't step forward and say something if it wasn't for a good reason, and I want to talk about that. I want to shed light on the history and the motivations behind EA and BioWare for why they would want to limit access to this game. BioWare established itself as a leader in this genre through its commitment to some of the best storytelling that's out there and true choice and consequence. The impact of their earlier titles, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, laid the groundwork for some of the design philosophies of games that we love today. Even with the successes that we've seen from Larian Studios' rendition of Baldur's Gate 3, many purists that are out there believe it doesn't even come close to the originals. With the introduction of the Dragon Age series, BioWare expanded upon the principles that it first set down, offering players complex moral dilemmas and rich character interactions that resonated on a personal level. There were no games that were like this at the time, making for some of the greatest games of all time. For many players, BioWare games were more than just entertainment. They were a means of exploring complex themes that were rarely explored in other games and engaging with characters in a way that felt truly authentic and relatable. The Dragon Age series, along with the Mass Effect series, are titles that not only carry a lot of recognition within the industry as pioneers in the RPG scene, but they hold a lot of value and meaning for the players. Some of their favorite memories, characters, and moments came from these games, and in many ways, these were the games that introduced them into the genre that they loved. As BioWare transitioned into the 2010s, the identity and the meaning behind the studio began to shift significantly. Despite successful releases like Mass Effect 3 and Dragon Age Inquisition, while these games still initially captured the essence of why fans loved BioWare, deep storytelling, excellent gameplay, player expression, and character-driven narratives, players and critics started to notice a concerning trend. The studio's titles began to feel increasingly commercialized and generic, chasing trends in multiplayer with Mass Effect 3 and losing some of the unique charm that had defined some of their earlier works. This shift in focus became particularly evident with the release of Mass Effect Andromeda in 2017. Andromeda did not land well with fans. I was a huge Mass Effect fan. Andromeda was just a complete letdown, whether it was the technical issues, the pacing, the story, the characters. None of it had the heart of what made the series so popular to begin with. It just felt like a cheap, directionless knockoff. Critics at the time had pointed out that the game just felt like it was rushed or incomplete, which made a lot of people feel that the studio had lost its way, a sentiment that was later amplified by the subsequent release of Anthem. Anthem suffered from a lack of content, technical issues, and a confusing narrative that nobody could really even get into. The ambitious concept that they had initially just fell short. EA and BioWare, shortly after the game's release, had promised that they were going to be working on an overhaul that was called Anthem Next. However, this was ultimately shut down mid-development and the game was effectively abandoned in place. Many believe that the essence of the studio was lost long before these releases, with the departure of both of their co-founders in 2012. Under their parent company, EA, which had already begun to devalue single-player experiences in favor of multiplayer and live service models, the studio's identity seemed to erode. Former EA CEO Andrew Wilson once stated that the future of games is in live service, indicating a clear pivot away from the single-player narratives that had defined BioWare's legacy. As the original developers and writers moved on, the sense of purpose that had once fueled and defined BioWare began to diminish. The studio, which had previously been a pillar of the RPG genre, now was starting to lose sight of who they were making their games for or what their franchises even were, resulting in fans losing faith in the studio and looking elsewhere for their games. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up the history of the company is because I'm trying to set the stage here. This is a really big deal. BioWare is a big deal. Regardless of their faults, the mistakes that they've made in the past, this is a brand that means a lot to a lot of people and the industry itself. They laid the groundwork, the framework for many of the RPGs that we love today. If it wasn't for Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, we sure as the heck wouldn't have 3. I'll tell you that right now. Mass Effect, Dragon Age, these are household names. These are games known around the world, whether or not people even played it. And if they did play it, they're likely in some of their greatest games of all time. I remember when I played Dragon Age Origins for the first time. I had just come hot off the heels of Wrath of the Lich King. It was some of the best years in gaming. I fired that game up. It was like my imagination had just spilled out onto the screen. The game was gorgeous. The storytelling was something like I'd never even seen before. I could interact with companions. My choices actually mattered. The RPG mechanics, the loot, everything was perfect. It was such a fantastic game. But time moves on. Visionaries leave. The core team that they had is gone. The founders are gone, and the vision changes. The direction changes, and that's just kind of the way things go. Even though the sign is the same, well, the people inside aren't. And I think that's been one of the things that's kind of plagued that company ever since a lot of those people left. But with that said, Dragon Age the Veilguard, from EA's perspective, this was their time. This is their defining moment to bring back and resurrect this studio and put them back into the public spotlight because it's an important franchise for them. Dragon Age, Mass Effect, both of them are incredibly important. These are the biggest IPs that EA has outside of sports and Star Wars. They don't really actually own that one. Sims, Need for Speed, these are a big deal. They need these games to succeed. They need them to find an audience, and they need that audience to buy it. And that's where the problem starts. Because you already have an audience that doesn't have a lot of faith in your game, and then you come out with some trailers that they didn't really like. So with their last few releases failing to meet the expectations of the fans, a fan-favorite studio now choosing to chase live service dollars with Anthem, then canceling that project altogether later, BioWare already stood on shaky ground. Players didn't really trust this company. While players were definitely excited when they saw that there was a game coming that was called Dragon Age Dreadwolf, the consensus was less about excitement and more about hoping that the game was going to be good and that the studio was going to be returning to its roots. If you go back and scope out the comment section on the game's first trailer on YouTube, many of the players were cautiously excited to see where the story and the game was going, wishing that they could see gameplay in a trailer that set a serious tone and left much to be imagined. Fast forward a few months, and there is a huge announcement. The game is no longer called Dragon Age Dreadwolf. It is now The Veilguard, a title focusing less on the story of the antagonist and more on the party that's trying to stop him. A very superhero-sounding name, similar to the Avengers, which, lo and behold, seemed to embody the early teens energy of the trailer that followed. The trailer depicted none of the grit, consequence, or maturity that the series is known for. Instead, it felt more like an intro for a Disney movie with character art that was reminiscent of Pixar movies. It was upbeat, jovial, and embodied nothing that the fans of the franchise have come to expect from Dragon Age, and the trailer on YouTube was subsequently ratioed into oblivion. Top comments like, "I didn't know Disney bought BioWare. Who bait and switched my gory, mature, dark fantasy RPG for Guardians of the Galaxy meets Clash of Clans?" And my personal favorite, "The most shocking thing is that BioWare let the comments open." On Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube, fans and critics panned the art style for its attempt to Fortnite Dragon Age. They felt like the entire essence of the series was lost, and skepticism around the game soared. Then I got curious, and I went back to see what games media's reaction to the fan backlash over the trailer was, and crickets. Nothing but completely ignoring the discourse from fans on social media, instead showing nothing but excitement, positivity, and zero skepticism. The closest thing that I could find was an article that was written about how players had felt that the game's theme song was bland and forgettable, and mentioning how apparently Veilguard is supposed to be a darker and more consequential story than the rest of the series. A few months later, we would see Veilguard's gameplay reveal trailer, showing that they had cast aside fan concerns about the series slowly but surely moving away from the tactical elements that the game had in lieu of action combat. It featured some of the most awful UI designs that I've ever seen, something straight out of a mobile game. You couldn't control your other party members, but don't worry, they said you'll have your hands full with the main character, only to show off completely generic and contrived combat that looks like it does more to distract than actually engage or entertain. Again, fans lamented, skeptics increased, and no mention of it was from the media, only excitement and positivity. Ever since this game's reveal, all you've seen is skeptical fans. The only conversations that I've seen regarding the pushback surrounding the game have been centered around social politics more than anything else. David Gator, the former writer for BioWare, took to social media pushing back against fan criticisms about how the game's female characters apparently weren't hot enough, and he just called the critics incels, later responding to others claiming that Dragon Age had gone woke and called them tourists. Only eventually for him to give way and say that he felt conflicted on the game and that the art style leaves him feeling cold. I'll be straight with you, he is absolutely right. Dragon Age has always had progressive elements. Dragon Age Origins had same-sex relationships before gay marriage was even legal. With that said, I can't help but feel that these sort of discussions and criticisms are the low-hanging fruit opportunities to move away from critical discourse. At this point, obviously negative reception surrounding this game's cartoonish art style, its abandoning of socially mature themes, or its identity shift into action combat has been seen nowhere outside of YouTube videos and player discussions. Little to none of this is coming from industry professionals whose job it is to make sure that they are signal boosting player concerns and representing them, which I find altogether off-putting. Ever since this game's announcement, it just feels like there's been a concerted effort to drown out genuine criticism with positivity and praise, something we've seen far too much in games media over the past few years, and I believe it's leading to a situation where communication is being lost. It is severing the connection between game creators and their intended audience. Now, I'm going to try to navigate this the best that I can. In previous videos, I brought up this idea that I think that genuine criticism is being shelved because of cultural commentary. Because everything has been wrapped up in cultural commentary more than anything else, identity politics and things like that. So what ends up happening is you have these two sides that are diametrically opposed. They cannot agree on anything. Their ideologies do not align, and as such, they cannot cede ground to the other party. As a result of that, they can't let the other party have a win. So they can't even talk about the things that otherwise they would talk about because they know that that other group is likely going to use that against them in the future. They don't want that situation whatsoever. And that's leading to writers not wanting to talk about art styles, not wanting to criticize the gameplay or the narrative or anything like that, because from their perspective, right now, for the writers and journalists, their true allies are the people that are making the games because they just can't stand the players anymore. And I get where they're coming from, by the way. I see things that annoy the shit out of me too, man. I see the posts on social media, people putting up a picture of Bunny with, the like thigh highs or the fishnets on, asses hanging out, cleavage rolling out, all that good stuff. Yeah, and then saying this is what players want, and then putting it next to like some stylized art of another character that makes no sense why you're even comparing these two things. Yeah, it's easy. It's low-hanging fruit, allowing developers and publishers and journalists to be able to say, well, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to listen to these people and what they have to say because it's low-hanging fruit. It's an excuse for them to not have to engage. And I think with a lot of the commentary that we've seen over the last couple of years, well, it's getting easier for them day by day to be able to not engage whatsoever with what players are saying or players are thinking. And in some cases, they're not wrong to do so because, I mean, let's be real. Do we really think every single video game character needs to look like Bunny from the first Descendant? No, absolutely not. That's definitely not the case. And while there are people that are out there that'll post that stuff on social media and it gets, hundreds of thousands of likes because it's social media, well, it detracts from the overall conversation. I don't like that it's out there sometimes because what ends up happening is they're just using it as an excuse to not have to engage with us. But what they fail to realize, journalists specifically, you have a job to do. You have an audience to serve. This isn't about alliances. This isn't about anything like that. And you shouldn't be trying to get closer to the people that are making the products because the closer you get to them and the further away you get from us, well, that doesn't work well for the customer. Back in September, creators and journalists were invited to play a vertical slice of Dragon Age the Veilguard. Many came back from the event feeling positive, while others were expressing some level of skepticism. It's about what you would think. Some players liked it, others didn't. This entry is incredibly divisive as they've made wide-sweeping changes to the overall tone, look, and feel of the game, while at the exact same time, keep in mind that customer expectations will be exponentially more difficult to meet after the release of Baldur's Gate 3. The bar has been raised. Now here we are, nearing the release of the game, and Wolfart FPS and later FXIV revealed that they did not receive review keys for the game. Wolfart FPS wrote on Twitter saying, "3 creators, including myself, were a bit more critical than others with our hands-on time with Dragon Age the Veilguard. Not a single one of us will be getting review codes in time to actually give our opinions before release. Just a thought that I would throw out there." Please keep in mind, folks, that this does not mean that my more critical opinion is better or more truthful than those who have been more positive. I'm just simply pointing out how marketing works. This also doesn't mean the game will be bad, but it's something to consider. So those who were granted access were primarily creators who had previously expressed some type of positive sentiments about Dragon Age the Veilguard, which raises some pretty serious concerns for access journalism. This practice isn't new. Similar situations have unfolded with high-profile releases like Cyberpunk 2077, where selective access led players to making purchasing decisions based on false pretenses. Now, after these posts went up, reviews began to flood in for the Veilguard, major media outlets lauding it as a return to form for BioWare, saying that it could stand next to Baldur's Gate 3, awarding it high scores, 8s, 9s, 10s. Heck, this might be Game of the Year. However, all of this extreme positivity sharply contrasts with much of the skepticism that we've seen from fans up until this game's release. Now, conversely, SkillUp, who has historically been pretty even-handed with most of his reviews, posted a review for the Veilguard that damn near to the T describes the game that many players feared that Dragon Age would be. I'll be honest with you, SkillUp is one of my first inspirations. I have a ton of respect for the guy. His wordcraft is insane, and even if you don't agree with his opinions, you can still at least see where he's coming from. His reviews stay pretty clean of any social commentary. He just focuses on the experience of playing the game. SkillUp's critique painted a completely different picture than any of the major publications, highlighting this game's inability to facilitate any meaningful choices or genuine interactions with party members. He noted that conversations felt more akin to parent-child dialogue than engaging conversations, making it feel as though HR was in the room with the writing team. He commented further on how the combat lacked any real depth, the art direction and character design took away from the game's overall themes, and altogether, the game felt like a generic offering, a far cry from what the series once stood for, and also a far cry from many of the reviews that we've seen from major publications. When players took notice of this, immediately we saw pushback from media outlets and talking heads on Twitter. Critics that were quick to dismiss any concerns about access journalism, instead framing it as unfounded conspiracy theories and a spawn of identity politics. Even when I tried to make any attempt to engage in balanced discussion, I had made a post just specifically talking about curated review scores, nothing about diversity or identity. I was immediately met with accusations of bigotry and racism. Put ideological differences aside for just a few minutes. Clear your mind. You can look and see that there is something wrong with how this game was released for review, and you can't help but feel it was done on purpose. For all intents and purposes, up until this point, this looked like a generic offering. Players were critical of it in its previews. Discourse around the game has never been positive. The studio needs to prove itself. The company needs the game to do well. Reviewers then, subsequently, did not get access if they were critical of the game. And while we have seen some negative reviews surface, only 4 out of 56 reviews at the moment of recording this video gave the game below a 7. We're seeing 9s and 10s from major publications and others that I don't even recognize. Reviews that are scoring just under that in the high 8s are using the same language and same impressions that we're seeing in the higher scored reviews, which makes a lot of sense as though Ziff Davis owns the wide majority of these games media companies, each of these publications having multiple subsidiaries, all of them echoing the exact same message. From my perspective, this looks like an obvious case of access journalism and culturing review scores to manipulate customers into buying something that they would otherwise have avoided. Reviews are sacred. They act as a beacon of honesty and insight in a world that is flooded with choices. They are meant to illustrate the qualities of a game, guiding players through a labyrinth of hype and marketing noise. When reviews are influenced or manipulated, it doesn't just betray the trust between creators and consumers, it robs players of their autonomy. This leaves us vulnerable. What I am seeing now is a world in which CEOs and marketing departments who spend millions of dollars a year on gambling addiction and social manipulation research are now influencing the one safe haven that customers have to be able to choose to spend their money wisely. All because these companies feel that they are entitled to our money. You know, I realize that there's going to be some people that are in the comments or reposting this video or throwing it up on, I don't know, r/circle jerk or something like that, and they're going to say something along the lines of, well, maybe it wasn't done on purpose. And the funny thing is the outcome is still the exact same, because that means that the players, the customers, being informed was never a priority for them. And that doesn't make sense if your game is good. Because I remember when Baldur's Gate 3 was about to come out, they wanted to make sure they got that game into everybody's hands. They knew exactly what they were sitting on. They knew that game could do well as long as players played it or players saw it, which leads me to believe that this is not a case of somebody forgetting to send out a couple codes. Instead, this is a publisher and a studio that wanted to curb criticism just slightly before the game's release to make sure that they could capitalize on some early sales. That's what I'm seeing. You know, I look at a lot of the discourse that's been surrounding this game and surrounding a bit of this controversy here, and all I gotta say is that I think that these marketing departments are eating good right now. This is perfect for them. Are you kidding me? You have two ideologically opposed sides that are screaming their heads off. You got one side that's talking about how it's a BlackRock conspiracy, while the other one are viewing a product as an ally. It's beautiful. You couldn't draw that up any better. Somebody's been reading some Sun Tzu, some Art of War. As a marketing major, you couldn't ask for anything better than this. Are you kidding me? They're not even talking about the potential of the game being a victim of access journalism. They're too busy bickering about their social political positions and their beliefs more than anything else. Man, that is beautiful. Couldn't ask for anything better than that. You know, I saw a couple people that were saying things like, you know, if the reviewer likes the game and I like the game, then they're truthful. If the reviewer doesn't like the game and I like the game, then they're lying. If the reviewer likes the game and I don't like the game, then they're a shill. And while there are some examples of that where you will see people believe those kind of things, I don't think that's the case for this. And I also, it's a matter of reading the room. There is nothing up until this point that ever showed that this game was going to be a game that was going to subvert your expectations and be this absolutely insane game, and everybody was completely wrong about it being bad. That never looked that way. It never has. And that's why it makes it so hard to believe that it could be anything else than what I think it is. And even more so are we to say that SkillUp wrote a fake review, that he lied about his impressions of the game and how it very accurately depicts exactly what a lot of people believe this game was going to be. That doesn't make a lot of sense. I think all of this is going to come to light as more reviews come forth. The most positive reviewers got access to the game before anybody else, and those with anything critical to say will come afterwards. While there is already some variance in review scores, if you actually go and look, the game is an 82 on Metacritic with 77% of people recommending it. What's really odd about this is that even those middle-of-the-road review scores, those mid to high sevens, are still using the exact same language, and it just doesn't feel authentic. The criticisms are the exact same, but the way that they're wording things, it just feels like this is actually a 10 out of 10 review, but the score is only a 7. It makes it feel as though they're just padding the floor to make it look like there's parity. Regardless, I do think that the scales are going to tip even further once the game is released into the wild, because we're going to get more players that can actually access it, and player reviews are the ones that are likely going to tell the story. And it's like I tell everybody all the time, wait for Steam reviews. I mean, we're already starting to see the team behind Mass Effect 5 distancing themselves from Dragon Age the Veilguard. Michael Gamble, the game's project director, wrote on Twitter, "Lots of people asking me about Mass Effect now that Veilguard reviews are out. And October 31st is close. Both are from the studio, but Mass Effect is Mass Effect. How you bring a sci-fi RPG to life is different than other genres or IPs, and it has to have different kinds of love." A user responded, "Please don't Pixar Mass Effect like you guys did with Dragon Age." To which Gamble replied, "I'm not sure I agree with the Pixar thing, but Mass Effect is photorealistic and will be as long as I'm running it." And to be honest, the way that that's worded leaves me to believe that he was actually pressured to use a similar art style as Veilguard, but like a good leader, held to his vision. Now, because so many people want to turn any type of criticism towards this game into a personal attack on the people that made it or the identities that people feel are represented by this game, I have something to say. Up until this video, I have made no mention whatsoever about the messaging behind the Veilguard. When I first watched the trailer, the themes and the Marvel movie aesthetic just turned me off entirely. The game bored me just by watching it, and the dialogue between characters lacked any of that human quality or nuance that I've seen in other previous entries, or in Baldur's Gate 3, which definitely has shaped my opinion on these type of games. When I looked at this game, it overall just looked like a generic offering that was going to give me nothing but quips, zero nuance, and garbage gameplay. Something that I have come to expect from EA, and I think a lot of other people have too. When people in my audience wanted to criticize the game and write it off because of the identity or beliefs of the game's director, Corinne Bush, I pushed back on my own audience, saying that you can only judge people based on their previous works. For me, seeing Corinne had only worked on the Sims games before Dragon Age, I could see that influence and lack of audience perspective throughout all of Dragon Age the Veilguard. The art style, the tonal shift, the way that characters interact with each other, and the fact that BioWare believed that this is going to be the darkest story in the franchise. It all makes sense when you look at the project history of its director. This is not a strike against who someone is, it's by the merit of the work that they have done. And that's how games should be judged. As I've always said, do not follow franchises, studios, or publishers. Follow directors that have proven that they can lead and deliver projects and games that you enjoy. So what do I think happened here, and ultimately what is going to be the outcome? I think that EA and BioWare desperately wanted to protect the image of this game because they saw all year round that this game was drug alongside a bunch of other failed games, and many other players believed that this game would be the same. And it's impossible for EA not to read the room. In an act to try to regain some trust, they ended up removing De Novo. Getting rid of that would bring in some players, and it's a real quick, easy PR win. People don't like De Novo. Then they watched creator reactions at the preview event. They picked some of the creators that had the best impressions, and that's who they gave the game. Marketing departments aren't stupid. They know that legacy media is swirling the drain, and the best way to reach players is through content creators. They knew that they didn't have to withhold reviews from games media because, well, more or less, they're just an echo chamber, and they won't give anything less than a 7 unless it's the day before. I think they planned it. I think it worked. And it worked a little bit too effectively, and the audience was expecting a really divisive game, and instead they were met with eerily too much positivity. You know, in the coming weeks, I think what's going to end up happening is we're going to see a major contrast between player reception and the media's perception of the game. It's going to be entirely different. Review scores are going to be all over the place, because I think when you make a game that's as divisive as this game is, not just like with its themes, but like the art styles change, the whole game has changed. It's not even Dragon Age in my eyes. I realize it's a popular term people have used for Dragon Age games over the years, but in this case, it really does feel that way. And I hate seeing stuff like this happen because this is a direct attack on your wallet. This is something that everybody should be able to band together, talk about, and say, hey, we don't want this happening. Why didn't you give everybody review codes? You should be able to put any like political ideologies or social ideologies aside and just focus on trying to protect yourself as a consumer, because that's the most important thing at the end of the day. It's one of the things that I try to make sure that I'm preaching the most on this channel more than anything else, and that's trying to make sure that we're protected as consumers, because I've said it in other videos, I think that this is the last vestige of industries that we can still protect ourselves in. And it sucks to see how this conversation can get out of hand so quickly. I do really think that they did this on purpose. It's kind of impossible for them not to have. It's way too obvious. It's just way too obvious. And I'm hoping this opens the eyes of a lot of people and they come to realize that professional media, legacy media more than anything else, is not to be trusted. Review scores are not to be trusted. Hell, even content creators, to be honest with you. Even if I review a game, you shouldn't be just trusting whatever I say. If I like it, that doesn't mean that you're going to like it. Maybe I'm paid. I'm kidding. I wouldn't want to do that because that shit's illegal. I'm too scared of doing illegal things. But yeah, you need to wait for other players to play it. It's like I always said, wait for Steam reviews. Steam reviews are the best place to go. Even if you're not playing on Steam, it doesn't matter. You can still make an account, log in, look at the game, see what players are reviewing it at, and then you'll get a pretty damn good idea of what that game is like and whether or not it's something that you're going to enjoy. And if it's something that's down in the mixed ratings, unless there was some crazy controversy that happened that made the player base mad, it's probably not a very good video game. It's probably just decent. And that's kind of what I thought that this game was going to end up being. I figured it was just going to be a generic video game. Not good, not great, just a video game with characters that nobody's really going to connect to. It's going to ultimately not meet the expectations of the long franchise fans or anything like that. And it'll be done and forgotten within a month or so, or something like that. Ironically, that's what they said about Black Myth Wukong, but that didn't happen. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys got some value out of it. Try not to bicker among yourselves too much. Try to make sure you guys are focusing on protecting yourselves. Outside of that, my friends, I am starving. I'm going to get some food in me. Stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe. Follow me on Twitch if you guys want to see me. The cat hair just like flew off my hand. If you guys want to catch me live on Twitch, you guys can see my cat more there. See you guys later. Peace.
Family, 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 family.